Imagine you wake up one morning and 80% of your revenue just disappears overnight. Not because you made a bad product decision, not because a competitor beat you, but because a global pandemic shut down every airport, every hotel, every reason anyone had to travel in a matter of weeks. That's exactly what happened to Airbnb in March 2020. A company that was valued at over $30 billion, a company that had just announced plans to go public, watched its bookings collapse in real time. Guests canceled over $1 billion worth of reservations. Revenue was projected to fall more than 50% for the entire year. The valuation cratered to $18 billion. And then, 8 months later, Airbnb went public. And on day one, the stock more than doubled, valuing the company at over $100 billion. More than Hilton, Marriott, and Hyatt combined. This is the story of how one of the most audacious comeback stories in business history happened, and what it actually teaches us about building something that lasts. To understand how Airbnb survived, you first have to understand how it started, because the origin story tells you everything about why it was built to last. It's 2007. Brian Chesky is a 26-year-old designer who just moved to San Francisco. He's broke. He literally quit his job, rolled up a foam mattress into his Honda Civic, and drove across the country to live with his college friend Joe Gebbia. They're behind on rent, and there's a massive design conference coming to town. All the hotels in San Francisco are sold out. So Chesky and Gebbia do something completely insane. They buy 3 air mattresses, throw them in their living room, and advertise online, offering a place to sleep plus a home-cooked breakfast for $80 a night. 3 people actually show up, and something strange happens. It's genuinely a great experience. Guests love it, hosts love it. That's where the name comes from, Air Bed and Breakfast, later shortened to Airbnb. They bring in their third co-founder, Nathan Blecharczyk, to build the tech. And they try to launch twice. First at a conference in Austin, 2 bookings, one of which was Chesky himself. Then at the 2008 Democratic National Convention in Denver, more press coverage than actual users. Chesky later called this period the trough of sorrows. They were buried in debt. Investors said no, repeatedly. The idea that strangers would sleep in each other's homes just seemed ridiculous to most people in Silicon Valley. So they got creative. They literally designed and sold novelty breakfast cereals, Obama O's and Captain McCain's, tied to the 2008 election. They made $30,000 selling cereal to keep the company alive. That's the kind of founders these were. Absolutely relentless. In 2009, everything changed. Paul Graham and Y Combinator accepted Airbnb into their program. Graham gave them a piece of advice that would define the company's entire culture. Go to your users. Not in a general sense, literally go. Get on a plane, knock on doors, meet your hosts face to face. Chesky and Gebbia flew to New York, the company's biggest market at the time. They went to host apartments, sat with people, took professional photos of their listings with a rented camera. They learned what hosts actually needed, what scared them, what made them trust the platform. The listings with better photos immediately started getting more bookings. It was obvious. So they scaled the photography program. This is what do things that don't scale means. You do the uneconomical, manual, time-intensive thing because it teaches you something no data can. And it builds the kind of product loyalty that eventually lets you scale correctly. Growth started slowly after YC, then faster, then explosive. By 2011, Airbnb was operating in 89 countries. By 2014, hosts had welcomed 10 million guests. Venture capital started flowing. Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, and others poured in hundreds of millions. Airbnb wasn't just growing, it was redefining a category. They weren't a hotel company, they weren't a booking platform. They were, as their tagline put it, a way for anyone to belong anywhere. That brand identity, human, warm, community-driven, turned out to be their biggest competitive moat. Fast forward to early 2020, Airbnb is preparing for its IPO. The company is valued at $31 billion. There are 7,500 employees. The platform lists properties in over 220 countries. Everything is on track. Then COVID-19 hits. In the span of a few weeks, global travel stops. Not slows down, stops. And because of Airbnb's extenuating circumstances policy, guests were allowed to cancel their bookings and receive full refunds. Hosts, who had been counting on that income, got almost nothing. More than $1 billion in reservations were canceled. Revenue forecasts for 2020 were cut in half, then cut again. In April 2020, Airbnb took out an emergency $2 billion loan from Silver Lake and Sixth Street Partners just to survive. The company's private valuation had already been slashed from $31 billion to $18 billion. And then came the announcement no founder ever wants to make. Brian Chesky wrote a letter to the company. It's one of the most widely shared CEO letters in business history, not because it was polished corporate speak, but because it was genuinely human. He said, "To those leaving Airbnb, I am truly sorry. Please know this is not your fault." They laid off 1,900 employees, about 25% of the entire workforce. But here's what set Airbnb apart in how they handled it. Every laid-off employee received at least 14 weeks of severance pay. They got 12 months of health insurance. They were allowed to keep their company laptops. And critically, Chesky promised that every departing employee would still receive their equity stake in the company when Airbnb eventually went public. In Silicon Valley, that almost never happens. The way Chesky handled that moment built something money can't buy: trust. From employees, from hosts, from the public. At a time when most companies were quietly letting people go and moving on, Airbnb made it as painless as possible and owned the pain publicly. That mattered enormously for what came next. Here's the part of the story nobody saw coming. While Airbnb's bookings collapsed, something unexpected started happening in the data. People weren't traveling to cities to see sights, but they were still moving. They were escaping to the countryside, renting cabins in the mountains, staying in rural homes far from people. Long-term stays of a month or more started spiking, and a survey Airbnb ran in mid-2020 showed that over 60% of guests were studying or working remotely, not vacationing. The pandemic hadn't killed the need for Airbnb, it had transformed it. As remote work became normalized, people started asking, why do I have to be in one place at all? I can work from anywhere. I can rent an Airbnb in the mountains for a month. I can live somewhere beautiful while I work. Airbnb leaned into this hard. They promoted long-term stays. They simplified the product. They cut a massive amount of the bloated strategy they'd built up over 12 years and got back to the core. By July 2020, just 3 months after the darkest moment, Airbnb hit 1 million nights booked in a single day for the first time since March. By Q3 2020, revenue was only 18% below where it had been in 2019. That's not just a recovery, that's a reinvention. And then they did the boldest thing possible. They announced the IPO would go forward in 2020 after all. December 10th, 2020, Airbnb goes public on the NASDAQ at an initial price of $68 per share. By the end of the first day of trading, the stock had closed above $144, more than double the IPO price. The valuation hit over $100 billion. To put that in perspective, Airbnb, a company that owns not a single hotel room, a company that had laid off a quarter of its workforce just 8 months earlier, was now valued higher than Marriott, Hilton, and Hyatt combined. And all those employees Chesky had promised equity to, the ones who left during the darkest months of the pandemic, they got paid too. What does this IPO prove? It proves that brand loyalty is a real moat. Airbnb didn't just survive because of clever pivoting, they survived because hosts and guests genuinely cared about the company. The community held. It proves that culture is strategy. The way Chesky handled the layoffs, with transparency and generosity, made Airbnb a company people wanted to root for. And it proves that sometimes a crisis doesn't kill a great business, it clarifies it. COVID stripped away every non-essential thing Airbnb was doing and forced them to rediscover what they were actually great at. So what's the real takeaway here? Three things. 1. Survive first, win second. The founders sold cereal to pay the bills. Chesky took a $2 billion emergency loan at the worst possible terms. None of that was elegant, but it kept the lights on long enough for the story to have a second act. 2. Trust is your balance sheet. Every decision Airbnb made, with their laid-off employees, with their hosts, with their community, was designed to protect trust. And when the comeback came, that trust was why people came back first to Airbnb and not to hotels. 3. Great companies don't just survive crises. They emerge from them with more clarity about who they are. Airbnb started on 3 air mattresses in a San Francisco apartment. It was built on the idea that strangers could trust each other, that travel could be more human. That idea survived a global pandemic, $1 billion in canceled bookings, and one of the hardest corporate pivots in recent history. And on December 10, 2020, the market said it was worth $100 billion. Not bad for a cereal company. If you found this valuable, subscribe, because next week we're breaking down why real estate moguls are billionaires. Drop a comment below. What's the business you want us to cover next?